Okay, we'll call to order the June 6, 2013 meeting of the West Sacramento Planning Commission. If I can have Commissioner Sandine lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Certainly. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. As a reminder, anyone wishing to address the commission should fill out the request to address form and present it to the clerk. Also, as a reminder, presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the commission. The commission is prohibited by law from discussing issues not on the agenda brought to them at this time. So we'll move to B, David, correspondence and staff communication.
Yes, Chairman Galvan, thank you very much. Just want to report on a couple quick items. Last night's council meeting, they took up the final map for the Fulcrum project in the Bridge District, which is a big milestone. I believe it was back in 2009 when your commission first approved that tentative map. That's for a large portion of the Bridge District that will facilitate development of those individual parcels pursuant to the master plan that your commission had previously considered over there. So that was exciting. Of course, they also took up the first discussion on the city's next upcoming two-year budget and capital improvement program last night. So those were also very substantive items. So if anyone is interested, the stream is online and didn't see it last night, you can view that. And then otherwise for tonight, Senator Wright will have a PowerPoint for the item number 4 on your agenda. That concludes my correspondence for you this evening.
Thank you. Any disclosure of ex parte communications? Start with my left. Moving to the consent agenda. Item number 1, consideration and approval of the minutes from the April 12th, 2013 special commission meeting. Comments? Look for a motion.
I'd make a motion that we approve the minutes from April 12th.
Commissioner Moore makes the motion. Palmer seconds. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those against say nay.
I need to abstain, excuse me, from that motion.
Any abstentions?
Yes, abstain. Thank you.
All right. Item number 2, consideration of the minutes from the April 18th, 2013 commission meeting. Any comments?
I'd make a motion to approve the minutes of April 18th.
Commissioner Moore makes a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Let her have it. Commissioner Perez seconds. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those against say nay. Motion carries.
And I also need to abstain on that as
I
well.
apologize.
Thank you.
You know what? I'll be all right.
And a second abstention here as well. Thank
So
you.
we have 2 abstentions, just for the record, Commissioner Sandine and Commissioner Palmer.
Thank you.
Which brings us, David, to item number 4, workshop on amendments to the zoning ordinance.
We have to do number 3.
I'm sorry, do we vote on
Zoning
number
administrative
3?
consideration of building mounted signage at 4305 Capitol Avenue on the consent agenda. Comments?
I'll move.
I have a question, if I could, before we do that, if you wouldn't mind.
We're going to move this along.
First off, I'm not sure exactly where this property is. Is it, we're driving down West Capitol on the left? What's
Yeah.
in between it?
It's at the west, what we call the west end of West Capitol, near Enterprise and the freeway off ramp, and near where the Epi's restaurant is on the south side of West Capitol. It backs up to the freeway.
Is it that one vacant parcel in there? This is the only map that didn't have what's in between it, that's why.
Yeah, this is a subset of like about a 6-acre parcel over there. There is another business on the property. I don't recall what it is. That's toward the east edge of this property, and this is toward the western edge of that site. I apologize for not having a better vicinity map, included with your packet, but this is now near the Enterprise Boulevard exit from 50.
Well, I guess my question of this is, if we approve them to put signs on the tanks, are we then violating our own zoning ordinance for signage because we've been trying to take all the signs down to the ground?
Well,
because I know we still have U-Haul that likes to keep their sign up. This is like going, well, they can do it, but you can't. And I'm just trying to figure out how we took the service stations to take their sign to the ground, and we want to have these people put their sign in the air, and why we're doing that.
Well, we would treat these signs as, as building-mounted signage, or at least the equivalent thereof. This is not a freestanding sign like many of the other signs are out there, like you would have at U-Haul, for example. So, in looking at this, this is certainly would be analogous to if somebody just had a 3 or 4 story building and they put a sign, that was up much higher than is, typical. It happens to have a vertical, form to it.
How high is this sign going to be?
See, the signs are mounted on the tanks where they're proposing them. Have the dimensions here on the tanks themselves. These are not to scale. They certainly are not anywhere close to the ground. I'm trying to find the dimensions here. We do have a project representative here if we want to be able to answer that specific question for you. But they certainly, the tanks, I believe, are in the neighborhood of about 40 feet tall, and so the signage is probably at about 35, 36 feet from the ground.
So we would be voting that they won't be over 35 feet off the ground?
Well, there's basically what you're voting on tonight is the allowable area that they can have at this site. What's peculiar about this project is, quite frankly, they just don't have a building, and all building-mounted signage is predicated on having a building with a main entrance on it.
And I read that.
So this is a fairly unusual case here, and so that's why we presented this as a zoning administrator item, but also wanted to bring it forth to the Planning Commission for final ratification, as this is one that, at least in my recollection, we have not had this particular scenario come up previously, to where there is no building involved in a project, even
Are these tanks going to be unattended then?
Yeah, the facility is unattended and remotely. It would function similar to like a card lock facility, to where the trucks come through and it'd be like a card lock.
I still am a little concerned, though, that by allowing someone to put it on the tank, it really kind of goes against what we've been talking about. If you were talking about a little lower on the tank, maybe, but I mean, we're talking about going up 3 floors, maybe, if we're 35 feet high. That just is a little disconcerting when we had Arco and Shell and everybody else take their signs and move them down, particularly in that same area.
No, I certainly recall what you're saying. We obviously went through many years with the signage issues. We were approaching this as building mounted signage rather than a freestanding pole sign. It's not to us. It's
and I
not
understand it's
equivalent.
different. I'm just trying to relate it so that it makes sense when we're doing it, and because you could see if they are allowed to do it, that you're going to have the Valero and the Chevron all go, well, we want our signs back up too. And that's what concerns me, unless we have a good reason that they get a special privilege.
Well, again, we were looking at this as building mounted rather than as a freestanding, not as a pole sign. And the other businesses that are out there also still have the opportunity to be on one of the larger 65-foot, freeway ID signs. There is one out there on the other side, and we have had folks that have wanted to do it on the north side, as well. So there are some additional options for those other businesses, over there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I'll move we ratify the zoning administrator action.
I'll second that.
Motion by Commissioner Liebig, seconded by Commissioner Sandine. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those against say nay. No. Any abstentions? Motion carries. Which does bring us to item number 4.
Good evening, Commissioner, Chairman Galvan, and members of the Planning Commission. The purpose of this public workshop is to introduce proposed zone amendments and get the Commission's and the public's feedback on these changes. These amendments will be summarized under 4 general categories, which include aesthetics, economics, miscellaneous, and mandated changes. Next slide, Cindy. Thank you. Fences, next slide, please. Fences, temporary on-site advertising signs, and front yard landscaping will be discussed under the aesthetics category. Temporary off-site directional signs and temporary seasonal sales will be summarized under the economics category. The miscellaneous category would include changes to existing definitions, changes to the land use matrix, and detached accessory structures. And lastly, the changes which are mandated by state law include an update of the city's density bonus ordinance and a new reasonable accommodation ordinance. Under aesthetics, I will begin with a presentation regarding fences. From time to time, staff receives inquiries regarding the use of barbed wire fencing and electric fencing. And the immediate issue at hand is that the current regulations do not address either of these types of fencing material. Generally speaking, barbed wire fencing and electric fencing are unattractive and promote a negative and unsafe image. However, they may be appropriate in certain areas of the city or for certain types of land uses. Based on a review of fencing standards for cities located in the region, barbed wire and electric fences are either prohibited or allowed with some exceptions. And you'll see that in Citrus Heights, they are not permitted. They are allowed in Rancho Cordova only in industrial zones for outdoor storage areas, and Roseville also allows them for security in certain zones and for specific uses. Next slide. There should be one on barbed wire fencing. There you go. And in Citrus Heights, barbed wire fencing is not allowed. In Elk Grove, it's only allowed in certain zones. Rancho Cordova only for security needs. Same in Roseville, and Sacramento they allow barbed wire fencing for non-residential uses necessary for the protection of people and goods. Staff is recommending that barbed wire fencing be prohibited with exception for security purposes in the agricultural and the industrial zones. We are also recommending that electric fences be prohibited. However, we are open to options and suggestions from the Commission in the event that the Commission does not want to prohibit them outright. For instance, the Commission may want to restrict them to certain zones or to certain land uses. Moving on to signs, this is one of staff's favorite subjects. The current sign ordinance does not regulate the size, the number, or the location of temporary advertising signs on private property, and as a result, some businesses display an array of posters, banners, pennants, balloons, and flags. And these signs have been displayed in landscape planters, parking lots, public sidewalks, light poles and fences, and in some instances, temporary advertising signs are being used as permanent signage. And this is an example of one where we have several banner signs being used as either temporary signage or permanent signage. This is an example of one where we have a balloon sign and we have an A-frame sign on public sidewalk, and you see the pennants there. And there is also a vacuum cleaner that's being used for advertising purposes as well. This is the same location, give you a different view, where you have the balloon sign, and then you have a number of, you have a couple of A-frame signs, and you have a number of vacuum cleaners. Next slide. And this is a sign that's posted on a tree. Next. Example of a couple of banner signs posted on a fence. If you look down the sidewalk, you can see this huge banner, this flag sign, and then you see the A-frame sign on the public sidewalk, and you see the pennants that are strung from someplace in the building across the sidewalk, and it's attached to looks like to the A-frame sign. Next slide. This is an example of poster banners that are being mounted on some type of, tires. Next sign. And this is a sign showing a series of flag signs, and you'll see this large, that's a golden flag sign there. And there should be one more maybe. That's it. We spend a lot of time regulating, citing, and enforcing the temporary advertising sign provisions. What we're proposing is that we want to provide some standards that will improve the appearance of the city's neighborhoods and continue to provide an avenue for businesses to market and promote their products and services. Staff is proposing that temporary signs be limited to banner signs only and prohibit the use of flags, pennants, and balloons. And in addition, most businesses would be limited to one banner sign. If a business fronts on two or more streets, two banner signs would be allowed. Businesses would still be allowed to display the temporary advertising signs 4 times each calendar year, and the goal is to have regulations that are clear for businesses, owners, and to help code enforcement officers apply these standards in the field. Moving on to front yard landscaping. This year actually, in March, the Planning Commission ratified the zoning administrator's interpretation that the collective provisions of the Southport Development Guidelines, the Southport Design Guidelines, the Landscape Development Guidelines, and the Municipal Code prohibit paving over the front yard area. And since the intent of these provisions are not articulated in the zoning ordinance, the Planning Commission also directed staff to prepare amendments to this effect. We surveyed several of the cities in the area, and most of them do have some requirements regarding landscaping in the front yard. We are recommending that 50% of the entire front yard be paved, and we're proposing 50% because we have found that for small lots that are located in Southport, approximately 40% of the driveway is already encompassed in the front yard area. So we expanded that provision to 50% to allow some expansion, but also to allow for other types of improvements like a sidewalk, walkway area, or maybe you might have a property owner that wants to add maybe a small courtyard. So that's something that the Planning Commission can consider as well. Moving on to the next category under economics, regarding temporary off-site directional signs for agriculturally related activities and standards for temporary seasonal sales. The zoning ordinance includes specific provisions for off-site directional signs related to the sale, lease, or exchange of real property. There are no provisions for off-site directional signs that are not related to real property. And so you all have probably seen off-site signs directing public to pumpkin patches and Christmas tree farms, which are currently illegal under the current code. And so we have drafted language in an effort to regulate these types of signs. Under the current ordinance, the off-site directional signs related to real property can be displayed anytime property is being sold, leased, or exchanged. So there's no limit as to the number of signs that can be displayed if they're related to real property. For off-site agricultural directional signs, we're proposing that they do be limited to 4 times per year and only during the active selling season. And they would still be subject to the same standards that are applicable to off-site directional signs. They must be directional in nature, spaced 500 feet apart if they are located on major roads and at intersections. The signs would be limited to 4 square feet in area and 4 square feet of height, and they cannot be located in the public right-of-way or on property that's owned by the public, and written permission must be obtained from the property owner to mount the signs. Regarding temporary seasonal signs, the ordinance does not include any criteria for temporary seasonal sales that crop up around the city that you see during Valentine's or Easter, Christmas, Halloween, and Mother's Day. And so under the business license chapter of the Municipal Code, these activities are allowed subject to an approved business license and an itinerant vendor permit. The itinerant vendor permit subjects these applicants to a criminal background check that is conducted by the police department. They are only allowed to be located at a particular location 3 days within a 30-day period. The 30-day period does not accommodate Christmas tree lots and pumpkin patches and similar types of seasonal sales. And so we have, in an effort to allow these types of outdoor temporary sales, staff has drafted some guidelines and requirements for the Commission's consideration. These criteria would not affect temporary seasonal sales that are associated with on-site commercial businesses like Lowe's or Home Depot that, you know, that would have their own Christmas tree sales or Christmas tree lots. We are defining temporary seasonal sales as the sales of goods and products such as pumpkins and Christmas trees, which are associated with a particular season or holiday and sold on a temporary and or annually recurring basis. This definition does not include fireworks stands because they are already regulated in the municipal code. They would be permitted, we're proposing that they be allowed in any commercial zone. Of course, a business license and an itinerant vendor permit would still be required. And we're suggesting that seasonal sales be conducted 10 days for Christmas, 10 days with the exception of Christmas tree lots and pumpkin patches. We allow for a longer time period. And we have included some language that basically says that if there is any nuisance created by these temporary seasonal sales, the city would be able to shut them down. Moving on to the miscellaneous category, we're proposing 2 changes to existing definitions. One is for the brewery. We have received a lot of interest from nano breweries that have expressed an interest in coming to the city, and especially in our industrial zones. And they typically operate in very small spaces, approximately 3,000 square feet. The issue is that the zoning ordinance allows 20% of the area of a building with a primary use to be used for the wholesale and retail sale of products that are manufactured on the site. This limit does not accommodate tasting rooms for nano breweries, so we are recommending that only for nano breweries that this limit or threshold be increased to 30%. Regarding sensitive land uses, we are recommending that religious institutions be added to this definition. The current definition includes residential uses, assembly halls, daycare centers, hospitals, schools, and long-term health care facilities. We are recommending that religious institutions be defined as a sensitive land use because they are assembly-like uses that include the elderly and children who, by virtue of health and aging health, have sensitivity to contaminants and pollutants. By adding this land use to the definition, this means that they will be subject to discretionary review and approval if located within 1/4 mile of M3 zoned properties, which is the same standard that is required for other sensitive land uses as well. Moving on to the land use matrix, we're only recommending 1 change to the land use matrix for boat repair. Currently, the use is conditionally permitted in the limited industrial zone. However, uses such as auto repair, truck service stations, and towing services are listed as permitted uses in the zone. Boat repair is a similar type use, so we're recommending that instead of a conditional use, that we're recommending that this use be permitted as well. We're recommending a clarification to the setback standards for detached accessory structures. The current zone states that detached accessory structures can be located 3 feet from the side yard property line. We are recommending that this be clarified that the 3-foot setback is only applicable to the interior side yard setback. In addition, we're recommending a language that requires detached accessory structures, such as, tool sheds and storage buildings, be located in the rear half of the lot, or, if not, screened from view of the street. This amendment will not affect detached garages, however. And lastly, there are 2 ordinances mandated by the state, which include the density bonus ordinance and the reasonable accommodation ordinance. The density bonus ordinance implements a continuing goal of the city to encourage the construction of housing affordable to low and moderate income households, and the reasonable accommodation ordinance facilitates the city's goal to meet the special needs of individuals with disabilities. The state passed the first density bonus ordinance in 1979, and it was amended in January 2005. So our density bonus ordinance is woefully updated, so we need to update it to be consistent with a state law, and the draft ordinance largely adopts the requirements of the government code. And given the number of changes that are required, the city attorney's office recommended that the amendment be handled as a repeal of the current ordinance and a reenactment of the updated ordinance. Regarding the reasonable accommodation ordinance, this relates to fair housing laws. Federal and state fair housing laws prohibit discrimination against individuals with disabilities in housing, and it requires local governments to provide individuals with disabilities or developers of housing for people with disabilities. They need to have some flexibility in the application of the land use and zoning and building regulations. So in 2001, the state attorney urged local governments to implement a fair housing or reasonable accommodation procedure. So the ordinance that is before you lays out a procedure for someone with a disability to come to the city and ask for an accommodation regarding their specific need. This concludes my presentation, and I'm available to answer any questions that the Planning Commission may have.
Thank you, Sandra. So I'm not sure how we want to take this. I counted sort of 8 items, really, topics that you discussed. I got fencing, signage, front yard landscaping, temporary off-site, directional signs, the breweries issue, land use matrix, density, and then the reasonable accommodation. So
Yeah, we were going to suggest that perhaps we try to take, your comments or questions on a per topic, basis, and also, of course, take public comment tonight as well. We recognize we brought kind of a lot of, stuff from A to Z, this evening, so to try to facilitate the discussion. Perhaps, Cindy, would you put the PowerPoint back up, please? And I think on that second slide, it listed most of the topics in the different categories. That way, we can try to proceed, and not get, confused on what topic we're on. We recognize there was a lot tonight.
Next one. Next one. That's not one. There you go.
Yeah, so perhaps if it was the
we'll just
commission's,
go in order. And
if that's the commission's desire, we just want to try to help move through kind of topic by topic would be our recommendation tonight.
If we're going topic by topic, I might like to hear the public comments first.
so would you guys prefer to hear public comment before we go?
Yes.
So at this time, is that all right, David?
Yes.
This time we'll open up the public hearing, and I have only one request to speak, and that's Michael Pate.
I'm loud enough you couldn't tell. I'm with the Electric Guard Dog, Columbia, South Carolina. I'm here to advocate for the permitting of electric security fences. I actually came in here a couple of years ago and tried to get a permit, it's about a year ago, for an electric security fence. And we had researched the code, and there was no prohibition in the code, and the city staff refused to even take my permit application and deny it. So over the course of the last year, we've been meeting with several folks on the city council and some other customers of ours. We've already had 2 more who've indicated a desire to put in electric security fences, as well as the chamber, to try to, and the city staff, police department, fire department, to try to draft some language for the permitting of electric security fences. And we have these things all over the state. The state allows the use of electric security fences in an obscure piece of the Food and Agricultural Code. And it's a very simple device. It's basically a 12-volt battery. It's a 12-volt battery powered by 2 solar panels that basically have, and after that you have a little amplifier or a charger. I get that 12 volts up to about 7,000 to 8,000 volts, and I shoot it down the line once every 1.5 seconds. It takes 3/10,000ths of a second for me to go a couple of miles. So if I'm going 4,000 feet in 3/10,000ths of a second, I can get that power back to me and read that power in an alarm panel. If that power drops below a certain voltage, I know something bad's going on out there, and I'm going to set the alarm off. I'm going to set the alarm off on the site, audible, and it's going to come back to me silently. I've got a call list, so at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to call Mr. Galvin if he's on my call list, and go, hey, we got something going on the northern fence, the northern wall, 220 feet from the northeastern corner, because I can measure the break down to about 10 feet. Now, if we were smart, we got a camera out there too. You could be sitting at home with your computer, bring up the camera and give it a little look, and if it's a nice windy night out, you can see there might be a piece of metal on the fence, grounded it out. We'll just shut it down and take care of it in the morning. Or I got 10 guys in hoodies with a couple of pickup trucks robbing us blind, and we want to call the local police department to come out there and make an arrest. Police love verified alarms, and that's what we're trying to give them. So we're basically an alarm system and a deterrent. I'm in Sacramento. Very simple building permit. Sacramento County, Rancho Cordova, Stockton, San Jose, Oakland, Phoenix, the whole state of Washington, the whole state of Oregon, Las Vegas. I was trying to get into the western side of the country here because I cover the whole country. So we're, pretty much all over the place. We always operate behind a perimeter fence, so there's always a perimeter fence up. And we put ours behind that perimeter fence, so no one can just walk by and just touch it. You've got to be going through a perimeter fence or wall to be able to get a hold of an electric security fence. Aesthetics is the big problem here, I think, that and the fire department. Fire department want free and unfettered access to everything. Thank you. I once had a fireman tell me that he didn't want a door or window anywhere. He just wanted to be able to get into the house and put out the fire. Now, the police, they operate a completely different manner. They want a lock on everything, the doors, the windows, the gates. Police love me. And the police, when we met with them, they actually said this was a great thing here in the city of West Sacramento. It hardens up these sites so they don't have to be going by there every week or so working on a property crime. They can concentrate on other things that they're really getting judged on. So aesthetics-wise, you kind of look at the pictures up there. Almost every picture you saw up there had barbed wire on it. And we don't like barbed wire either. It really doesn't help us at all. We're very difficult to see. I've toured this area. There are probably about 6 or 7 electric security fences up here now. And no one knows where they are because they're very difficult to see except by the criminal element. We're always signed. You've always got a nice little yellow sign up there that says, caution, electric fence, don't touch it, 7,000 volts. It's not visible from the highway. You've got to be walking. It's got to be pretty close to it. It's about the size of my yellow pad, so that's about the size of the signage. That's also required by the state. So we basically test and label these things with a nationally recognized testing laboratory, like UL. We use Met Labs, but we test and label all these products so they're basically safe and reliable for human use. So we can't hurt a human at all. So, that's basically the overview. What we're asking to do is probably see if we might be able to get a prototype or a protocol in place where we can actually permit electric security fences in West Sacramento. And that's kind of a brief overview. I didn't get too technical with it, I hope. But if you have any questions at all, I'd be glad to answer them.
Thank you. Any questions? Sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So we'll close the public hearing and we'll bring it back here. And I guess we'll start top to bottom. We'll start with fences, and I'll start to my left.
May I?
Yes.
I actually have some overview items before jumping in. I just have thanks for the presentation. And I know that working on code, it's great to have it all at once, but it is quite a collection of things. 2 questions. One is, because I know we're trying to do a lot with this, what things we might not have in here now that may come up to us later? Like, I know we talked about food truck stuff and other things like that. What top of mind that may come back to us later? Just so we can see the whole kind of universe of other kind of issues like this that you're dealing with. I just don't want, if we have a chance and we can add and make it completely comprehensive, it would be great to do that.
Well, our intent was to have what's before you, represent, what we want to try to accomplish, for this year's go-round. There is one other small item that we didn't get in here on time related to business centers that we may bring back to you next time, more of a definition amendment based on some recent experience we've had with purported business centers in town. But what you have before you tonight does, represent by far the vast majority of everything we're going to ask you to consider, this year.
Great. thank you. And then my second kind of overarching question or comment has to do with grandfathering. And I know that in the past, like for example, earlier we talked about signage, and I know that there was a signage ordinance put in place, and it was before my time. And I think Charlie, you might be the only person who was actually on the commission at the time when that went through. But I know that that was quite, you know, that was put in place, and it was put in place to make sure that there was kind of a comprehensive or total look for the city. And I noticed, because it had been issued to me earlier about the paving over the yards, that was the only place where there was a comment about actual grandfathering in. So I'm just curious, in terms of totality, is everything else, except with that exception, going to be expected to be up to code? Like if we had, in some of the photographs of the banners, there was a razor fence that I know faces Jefferson. I drive by it every day. Would that, if we were to pass this eventually, would that have to come down because it's facing a street? I'm just curious about the grandfathering and just pulling that one exception.
I can respond to that.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Actually, the legal term of art is called a legal non-conforming use. So any use that is complying with the existing municipal code up to the date that the Planning Commission recommends approval and the City Council actually approves an amendment to the municipal code is continued to allow to exist until that use changes. So for example, with the sign that you mentioned, if the sign does not conform with the requirements of the sign code today, then it's an illegal use, and under no circumstance can it exist, and it would be subject to code enforcement abatement. However, if the sign is a legal use under the existing sign ordinance today, and the sign ordinance was to change in 2 months, for example, as a result of these, then that sign would allow to be to continue to be able to be put up until the owner changes the use or no longer wishes to use the sign.
Thank you. So I'm guessing that, and I suppose I can ask that when we get there, the residential piece is kind of exceptional for a homeowner, because when that changes hands, we're not going to expect that the homeowner will be changing the nature of the home. I think that's, otherwise they're mostly
That's
business
correct.
uses. Okay. I still will disagree with that, but we can get there when we get
I
there.
think part of what you're referring to when you brought reference to signs was previously what we had was that amortization, and that was a a specific matter that where there was an amortization set and a certain timeline set where that coming in. For what we're not proposing to amortize anything that happens to be existing right now with any of these changes. So the city attorney's comment is correct here, and this is typical. Amortization is not common because it requires a fairly advanced study, because it gets down to the economic value of whatever you're trying to amortize. So although that can be a good tool, but we're not proposing that this evening.
Well, thank you both, and I'll extinguish the use of grandfathering from my vocabulary.
Need a light word, right? So can we get that back up on the screen, the PowerPoint? So I guess we'll go left to right and go through each topic and work this through. Let's start with fences, and I'll start with Jeremy. Do you have anything?
Just in regard to the fencing issue, I personally don't want to see an absolute prohibition on the barbed wire or electric fencing. Obviously, I wouldn't want to see it in like a commercial zone or like in West Capitol, like on a car lot or anything like that. But I think that there are industrial needs for that, either barbed wire or I don't want to preclude us from saying that this area needs that type of security. And I'm kind of curious as far as when we say unless used for security purposes, who makes that decision?
That's a recommendation that the planning commission can make.
But, so
It's
it
your
would,
call.
it would come to us and say, your property meets this
If it's in-
threshold that, where you could have that,
If you,
that type
if
of
you put some,
security?
if you put some language in the zoning ordinance, you can specify which uses would be appropriate.
Okay.
And
With-
that's what this other jurisdictions have done. They put that in the zoning code. For instance, outdoor storage areas, they have construction contractors' yards. I think either Roseville has that language in their municipal code. So some cities have limited to zones, and some cities have limited to certain zones and specific in certain types of uses. So it's up to,
Okay.
You have some options.
Okay, and along those options, I mean, what if they're okay if it's not visible? Absolutely. I mean, you say, should not be visible from the, any city street, so you could have it just as long as it's not visible.
That's something you can consider.
Okay.
Yes. I'm not, the planning commission has to make a decision. Do you want those types of fencing to be visible from a public street? Or do you want them to be hidden, in the back and the rear of the property? We would recommend that they not be visible, but, like I said, planning commission has some options.
Okay.
For both of these topics, if the commission, isn't interested in any type of outright prohibitions, then we can move on to, discussion of, well, in what application might it be considered, and that could be based on a zone base or geographically, or even both. But our hope would be to try to get as much objective criteria built into the municipal code as possible, so that there are clear standards of when these types of things could be used and when they couldn't be used. And that way it should be clear, hopefully clear to anyone who wishes to utilize either of these types of fencing applications.
Thanks for that clarification.
I'm actually happy with the barbed wire as written, because it's allowed in agricultural and industrial. I can't see a need for it in residential or commercial, especially business parks. I think that would be inappropriate. I do have a question on the electric fences, something that, I'm sorry, I did not write down the name, our community member spoke about, a sensory type electric fence versus a charged electric fence. Is there a difference? In other words, if I went up and touched a fence, that would indicate that somebody's touching the fence. Is there a difference than me going up and getting shocked? Are those two different types of fences?
Don't know.
I would presume so. I presume we're not talking about lethal fences in this application. I would hope we aren't talking about lethal fences, at least, in this application.
I guess my only comment would be a sensory type fence. If it's just picking up somebody trying to break through the fence, I don't see a problem with that one, unless it throws out a shock. And maybe just throw it back for a CUP for more clarity. That would be my own. So I'm not pushing, since I don't have enough information to actually make a decision on that, but perhaps instead of an all-out prohibition, bring it back for a special permit. And that's specific for a sensory type. That would just be
So-
mine. I'm not sure if anybody else has a.
So we're doing the aesthetics group. That's what we're talking about,
I
all
think we're
all
just
three of
going
them right
item
now.
by item.
Item by item.
Item by item, fencing.
Fencing.
Okay. I actually think we should consider the possibility, like how that would look, the electrified fencing as an option. I've seen it used in agricultural areas, mostly, but we could. I think it's worthy of exploration.
That's true. The city actually uses it on the levees to control the sheep.
So I won't,
I only know that because I was jogging past them, and they are charged.
Did you touch it?
so I won't belabor it. I would be against a outright prohibition. I can't foresee every need that there may be in the future, so I don't want to prohibit. But I would be in favor of, obviously, a strict review, CUP, some sort of a recommendation from the police department when it came to electrified fencing if an applicant came through. Appropriate. And of course, aesthetics should.
I'd like to thank staff for the presentation. I'm also against a total prohibition of the electric fencing, so that's my comment for that one. The barbed wire, I like the way it's written. I don't see any changes to that.
I don't know anything about an electric fence. I mean, the way the gentleman was describing it, it might be okay, but like others, I think I need to have a little more information, or at least have a presentation come to us to say why we should have an electric fence in a location. The barbed wire fence, I find that interesting because I think the barbed wire has to be put down to the different zones. Like an industrial zone could have it, but a residential zone couldn't have it. I think that makes a little bit of sense to me. And I would just love to see how you put up a barbed wire fence so nobody could see it from the fence or the street. I mean, I've seen a million of them, but I've never seen one that you couldn't see. So I would be curious when you come back and you're promoting that, yes, we would love to do this, but we want you to have a fence or a barbed wire up there that can't be seen from the street. I'm just not quite sure how you do that. And part of the reason you want a barbed wire fence up there that they see is to tell them you don't want them climbing over your fence to steal all the stuff out of your yard. So that's why I think you have it, but I would be curious to see what you're proposing and how it's going to work so it'll be a fence for protection, but it can't be seen from the street. And, you know, whether it's barbed wire or that razor wire or whatever, I mean, if there's a difference that you're proposing, that would be okay too. But I think that you have to offer some type of security for the industrial area so that they can protect their properties out there when no one's there. And my final comment, you're going to love this one, Sandra, so just, you ready?
Ready.
So how many businesses and people did you contact to let them know that you were proposing to change something like this? He says there's 6 electric fences here in the town. What are we going to do with those? Are we going to let them stay? Are we going to ban them? Are you going to contact the people to let them know?
Well, I don't know where these fences are located.
And the barbed wire fences, of course, are on almost every piece of industrial property in this town. So if you're proposing to eliminate it or do something, don't you think we should contact all those businesses to let them know that there's something in the mill? That's my comment, is that we should, you know, make some sort of an outreach to let people know that we're proposing, if we're really truly proposing a change that is going to be retroactive in the whole process, I think we need to contact them and at least give them an opportunity to comment.
Yeah, these changes wouldn't be retroactive, and we'll also be going to the Chamber of Commerce next week to go over these materials, you know, with them as well, to try to promote this, you know, through the business community. We know the Chamber has interest in some of this stuff in particular, and I'm sure this is definitely one of them.
Well, I'm sure they do, David, but remember the Chamber has 200 or 300 members, and we have 2,000 or 3,000 businesses in this town. So that's why I'm asking how we're going to make the outreach there. So it's just, I think if we're going to make it for a new business that comes in, here's what we're proposing to you, that's fine. If we're going anything retroactive, I think we have to at least let them know. And that was my comment on fencing.
So, thank you very much, everybody, for your comments on the fencing. It's brought some additional thoughts, as had a chance to hear from everyone in the presentation. Regarding the barbed wire fencing, that my concern also is for the need of those businesses that have had used them and the rationale for them to use them. I don't know exactly what that is specifically, and we haven't quite had a chance to get that vetted out, and would be interested in learning more about that. If it's for security reasons, if they've had experience, I mean, I think that's, if you put barbed wire out there, you must have had some level of experience, and if the police department has any information, maybe checking in with them, and just getting some feedback as to what their thoughts are about this, if it's helpful to deter crime, and it contributes to fewer police calls. Because I don't know what that kind of, you're going to have an economic impact on that business, and then you're also going to have an impact on law enforcement to respond to a call. So I just want to make sure that we're taking a bigger picture of that, and not just with the Chamber of Commerce, if at all possible, maybe looking, just checking in around, where the business is. I am concerned, though, with the appearance, and I don't know how to get around that. If you put it behind the fence, or if it's hidden, it may be difficult, if somebody does break in, or somebody is trying to get in, or the fire department is trying to get in there to address something, for them to be able to see that. And so, I have a concern with either emergency personnel or anybody going in there and walking into that situation and being hurt. So it could be a liability for the business owner. And I'd like that to be explored a little further if that's the case. Regarding the electric fencing, I don't know much about electric fencing. There may be a need for that, and if there are current business owners that are using it, maybe and anybody can contact them and have them speak to the folks in the city just to contribute their thoughts and the rationale for having that. My concern is also the wildlife, and we've got quite a bit out here, and we do like to preserve as much as we can out in the city. So if there's any impact on the wildlife as well, I would be interested in knowing. But if it's for the purpose of protecting the business again, I have the same comments just to make sure. And with the fire department, if there's going to be for folks to come back and check with the Planning Commission for a permit use, that we also, not only with the police department, but check in with the fire department on their opinion on a particular business reaching out for a permit, if that's going to be the case here.
So, without the list, signage? We get that, that's what I have in mind. Sort of out of order in the presentation, but I had temporary on-site advertising signs. I'll again start to my left.
Yeah, the proposed changes look like they sufficiently address that issue. I don't have really any comments.
Well, we're not hitting my favorite topic, but okay. So let's see, this is on page 7 of the staff report. You brought up pumpkin patches, and the text says they're permitted in any commercial use.
I think you're on the wrong one. You're number 4. I think it's the temporary advertising.
Oh, am I in the wrong sign section?
Yes.
Okay, banners. Well, I have a comment on that one too. I've always referred to, or I always thought of the balloon signs. Those are the dancing guys, right? I actually didn't know that was called a balloon sign. I always considered those movable signs, and in past zoning ordinance changes, I thought we had prohibited movable signs. So I've always been under the impression that those were already not allowed.
Yeah, the balloon signs, to me, clearly we need to work on definition. Truly is a balloon that someone will float above their business, but the moving and animated signs are prohibited. You are correct. Those traditionally have meant signs that are digital and maybe they flash or they scroll, something like that. Some of these signs that seem to be kind of jet powered, if you will, have been a new application, such that we saw in some of those slides. And so I think that if under that particular application, if that were the determination that we would make that those are the movable signs, and then those would be prohibited as well.
I would classify those dancing guys as movable, but that's just me.
Why? Because they move, huh?
They move. There's also spinning type, flag type signs, and I think we had incorporated those also as movable when we discussed them. That was a couple of years ago. But, the other comment I had is just something on that Sandra said, and I misread it. If this is the intent, flags are prohibited. Are we talking about the this is going to sound stupid, the poles that you stick in the ground and they're more like little sails, or are we talking about IKEA's flags?
No, we were referring to the ones the ones that I usually refer to them as pennants, where they're the ones on the poles and you stick them in the ground. We've been seeing a lot of those, lately. But we certainly don't mean, when we mean flags, we certainly don't mean like American flag or something of that nature. But we do, and out in IKEA they have their PD out there. It's a little world unto itself to some extent. But we're trying to capture the gamut of the temporary banner type signs that we see that are a continual problem for code enforcement, that they do their best to keep in check, but is really currently right now is largely out of control because there's so many of it out there.
That was it for me.
I would, I don't have anything to add to the previous comments, except I'm really interested in hearing after you have met with the Chamber of Commerce. I think that will be really helpful. They may see things from a different perspective and have some guidance for us. So I think that'll be useful for the next time this comes back to us.
Yes.
The only thing I have is, David, I'm just curious why. So you went with banners, okay, one only, no flags or balloons. Why not just one only?
Well, that certainly is one option. Our goal here was to try to get, as much objective, criteria in there, particularly to help our code enforcement team. So when they're out there and are, trying to, do enforcement on this particular matter, which has been a priority for them from the council over the last couple of years, that it isn't a complete free-for-all, kind of like it is right now. So
that's a recommendation I would have, because I could see some storefronts that may not be very wide, where that flag may be appropriate for them. Limiting the number may accomplish the same thing. That's all I got.
I'm kind of confused about what Commissioner Liebig brought up, whereas what's already banned and what's changing, because I was also under the impression when it came up a couple of years ago that the balloon ones were also the squiggly ones, because I kind of like the squiggly ones, and we ended up banning them. But I mean, they to have them 5 or 6 of them out there, of course, it's kind of busy, but I don't know, they're entertaining, I guess. But I guess my main comment on the banners is the one picture that you showed up on the corner of the kebab place, the one that had all the banner signs up, that's to me really, really busy. And I know sometimes they tend to tear and they're not, and they still keep them up. So are we limiting those to one?
That's a recommendation.
Okay.
That's just what we just put it out there, and you can
that's
consider
how
it,
this-
or you can allow more, but we're just trying to rein them in.
yeah,
Right,
Because
okay.
right now there's no
They're just
specific limit.
There's no limit. They're just
And-
out of control in some areas.
and-
Because I know like the Chevron one, where it has like on the corner, and it kind of, to me that it's not as busy as where you have where there's, 4 or 5 different colored signs. So as far as aesthetically, I prefer one over the other, even though, like, if you limit it to square footage or something like that, that might, get too difficult. So I do agree with the limiting the number of signs. I don't know if one will do, because it depends on the storefront. I mean, because you might have 2 smaller signs versus 1 large sign. So maybe 2 might be a better number. That's my comment.
So, I'm sorry, Charlie. Just as I was thinking, you may want to consider also the proximity to the business for the sign. Not pushed out all the way to the corner. Sorry, Charlie.
Your history lesson on signs tonight is that we actually tried at the very beginning and maybe continued on through to get the signs off the sidewalks, out of the streetways, and back into the buildings. Now, it's my understanding, we can have, if you have a brand-new office, Babs's husband's going to open a real estate office, he can have flags out there and say, here's my new office for a short period of time, right?
Yes.
So
With
you
a permit.
can have flags out there, banners out there saying, hey, we're open. We just opened our brand-new business. That's great. But after that, it had to get cleaned up. And I think the thing I'm not seeing enough of that I complain about all the time is there's not something in here prohibiting the A-frame signs. And people will take an A-frame sign and set it at the corner of Jefferson, and it's out on the sidewalk. I mean, it's stopping pedestrian traffic, and then if they get in trouble, they try to move it back and put it in the landscape area. I mean, A-frame signs are banned as well as the others. They're not supposed to be out there either.
A-frame signs under limited circumstances are allowed, currently. They're supposed to be, I think, limited of like 2 feet by 3 feet and within 25 feet of the business entrance. Clearly, they're not supposed to be on the sidewalk and, obstructing the sidewalks. That certainly does happen.
David, I mean, I think one time you and I even talked about a few years back over at Big R, they just had one A-frame sign after the other out in the front. And I mean, that's not what we want to see. And I think A-frame signs have to be part of this as well as, and the big flags that are flying now that are on these long poles and flying, they didn't exist when we wrote this ordinance back then. So that's a relatively new advertisement thing and probably needs to be addressed. And the sign at the Chevron station can be moved back to the station itself and out of the front right away. So, I mean, I think we have to work with the businesses, but this will be very interesting to see what the chamber and their business people think, because I think you have to really take the advertisement part of it, and having a banner on your business, it's your building, that's fine. But beyond that, it starts getting out of control, and if one person puts one sign out there, it's kind of like what Sandra showed us at 15th Street. It just, now all of a sudden the whole street corner's got them. So, I mean, you got to stop it somewhere, and I don't know where you begin, but I think I need to see a little bit more on the A-frames in here too, because that seems to get a little bit out of control also in this town.
So my concern with the signage is just the carnival look, and everybody competing for, the attention and the traffic that's going down on Jefferson and other places where that just starts to get a little bit out of hand. So I appreciate that being raised here today and trying to address this. I have been in the past, when the city would go from business to business, just checking with the business owners, the small business owners, getting feedback from them on how business was going, say when there was an economic crisis. The banners were raised and how they were limited to being able to market their business. And so I felt sensitive to that concern, that they were trying to figure out a way how to market, what they're selling or what's going on in their business. And not everybody has a nice front area where there's a lot of traffic going down. And I don't know, I couldn't provide a response on how they could do that, because there's a lot of competition in this neighborhood. There's a Walmart that can sell the vacuum cleaners. There's other places where other businesses have gone down, and I don't like to see business folks that have been here for a while leave. We're trying to find a way to maintain as many businesses as possible. So just trying to find a balance. And I think you've, from what I've heard from the commissioners, is really good feedback. Explaining to the business owners, what the goal is, and maybe working with them if there is any kind of outreach, or there's a decision and there's some feedback from them. I would really like to hear from them how we, the Economic Development Advisory Commission and this commission can work together to address what those concerns are, and help them out. And because they've been hanging in there for as long as they have, and we just want to maintain them in our community for as long as they want to be here.
I apologize. Well, as this conversation was moving along, another thought came to mind, and I just don't know if it's in the ordinance or the zoning oversight. Is spinning signs, people holding signs? Do we address that at all? Is that part of this?
Not directly, and we have seen, yeah, I mean, we have seen the human signs, deployed in many, contexts in town, and we have not attempted to address that, directly, through this, with that phenomenon. We haven't known that to be become a large problem,
I think
but it certainly is, perhaps objectionable to at least, some people.
Well, I would only encourage, I think having the chamber conversation for staff is to think about unintended consequences. If we say you can't have this banner, are we all then going to have, like all the way down Jefferson, have spinner people, with signs? So, I mean, people want to do the right thing, and if it's not addressed, it may end up, it just may be worth conversation.
They have stand-up shaped, like people posts that spin those signs now, so the labor's getting much cheaper, just cost the battery.
Movable mannequins would fall under movable signs.
We'll go to front yard landscaping.
Sorry. Oh, no, I was just making a joke.
That was the paving restriction.
What's that?
What's next?
Front yard landscaping is next, yes, 50%, right?
Yeah, with the paving restriction.
Our intention was to bring this back after the commission had looked at this topic, earlier this year, to try to codify it. That was their direction, as I recall, from that evening. So we did look at a few other cities to try to look at this, and then also tested it on a few lots in town that we have, including my own home, to make sure I wouldn't be violating it with my driveway alone on a relatively narrow lot. And so we have brought this back tonight to hopefully capture the commission's direction from your prior discussion on this topic.
Well, we can do that. I was giving you time to collect your thoughts, Charlie. But you know what? I'll put Martha on the spot. We can start at this end.
No, I think it's, I appreciate this being returned after additional review, and with the suggestion to expand it 10%, that's good. So
Right now, there is no threshold. We don't have a standard, but I tested on a couple lots and found that on the smaller lots, it seems that the driveway already encompasses close to 40% of the front yard area. So I, thought it might be a good idea to expand it a little bit. 50% of the front yard could be paved. If it's not for parking, it could be like, maybe a walkway area, or maybe like a small little, area for a courtyard. But at least there is some room for expansion. But at the same time, we want to maintain some landscaping in the front as well.
And I probably fall in that category. I have the biggest driveway out in front of my house, and I needed some walkway over to my backyard. So I appreciate that. That's good.
I think it's a great idea. I
Okay.
think that's the way we have to do it, because we have to see a little landscaping somewhere.
I'm fine with the way it's proposed.
So I guess the only question I have is if we have smaller units built in the future, trying to picture those ones right by OLG, but what if there's very little front yard landscaping? Just the sheer building of it.
If we can anticipate that with a project like that one, then we will probably want to try to build into that project's approval some degree of exception from this to be realistic, and perhaps like a plan development standard, because those lots are particularly narrow, in that project, and that's a good example, for us to make sure in the real world, so since there are so many, obviously many lots out there already, that this wouldn't be totally burdensome even for a project of that nature.
So that's my concern. I didn't want it to kill a project that may be appropriate, but.
I have a quick question. Would an HOA, in some of the circumstances, they could overrule this kind of changing to the front portion of a house or
Well,
not with the city ordinance? I'm
Well,
just-
certainly an HOA could go more stricter than this
Right,
if
okay.
it chose to.
Okay.
But that would be something privately enforced by that HOA.
And then again, I'd encourage you when you're having the conversation, thank you. I would encourage you when you're having the conversation with the chamber to find out their feelings about the date for folks to not have to make changes to pre-existing build-outs. I can't, even though I'm married to a Realtor and I probably should know the answer to this, I don't know if that would affect that business, so I think it'd be worth having a conversation. I particularly, again, if I were living in a neighborhood and someone had like gone all the way over and paved and looking around, every other house has a lawn, I would hope that I could have some remedy at some point in the future, because I would feel like it devalued my home, living next door to a driveway. But that's just, it's a personal opinion, which I know you've already heard, so I just hope that you can get some input from the chamber.
Yeah, just to clarify, this ordinance would not apply retroactively if it were approved. This reason why this is phrased that way is when those, at the time, as I recall, at that time when the Planning Commission considered this before, it was based on two real-world cases where this matter had come up. And the commission at that time did not find that those homes who had done that at that time were in violation of any portion of the city's municipal code or specific plans. So they did not, so those particular ones would be allowed to keep the improvements that they had done. But going forward, if this is approved in some way, shape, or form, anybody else going forward, would have to follow this. But for those that may be over this currently, this would not apply to them retroactively.
Everything else we're doing, that was my original question, but everything else we're doing, if there were a transaction or change in ownership of a property, a business owner would have to bring it up to code.
Not necessarily, not just that change of ownership.
Okay.
For the fence example, just to put it out there, if somebody had barbed wire on a fence and they sold the business to somebody else, that they could retain that. But if for some reason they decided to take that fence down out of their own choice and wanted to put up another fence, we wouldn't let them put it up with barbed wire. I mean, that's kind of an example of how it would work in the real world. Well, there's always that exception in there, but it happens a lot with fences where for whatever reason folks don't want a wood fence anymore and they want a brick fence. But if they had a 6-foot wood fence and it was supposed to only be 4, well, if they want to put up a brick one, then that brick one's only going to be 4. So that's generally how it goes.
No, that looks pretty good. I remember back when we talked about this in the workshop, I think it was Commissioner Guerrero that brought up the disabled access thing. Do we need to write something in there about that?
Well, fortunately, the reasonable accommodation ordinance that we have tonight will take care of that.
Okay. Then, looks good.
So we'll start again to my right, and we'll go with the temporary site directional signs for temporary seasonal sales. Pumpkin patch.
Off-site directional signs?
Temporary seasonal
4.
sales.
Temporary seasonal sales.
Temporary season, yes.
Page 7, yeah.
Oh, no, I was actually pretty good with this one, so I'm good, yeah.
My question is, we can do it for pumpkins, we can do it for Christmas trees. We have a couple of strawberry farms here. Can they have a directional sign to strawberries down the road a ways? And we have, to my knowledge, one vegetable place out there in Southport. Will he be able to have directional signs?
If it's agriculturally related activity, yes.
For what period, though? See, that's
During the
what
growing.
I thought you said 30 days.
Are you talking about seasonal sales or temporary off-site directional signs for agricultural?
I don't know. I personally.
Which one are you?
I don't know what everybody else is talking about.
you on
but I
page-
was talking about page 7.
Okay, on page
And I
7
said
is,
temporary seasonal sales.
okay, temporary seasonal sales are different
is
from
kind
temporary
of-
seasonal signs.
Kind of what,
Yeah.
isn't a vegetable garden temporary seasonal? I mean, it's not all year.
Yeah, I think where part of this comes in mind also is how the property is owned. I mean, some of those,
Hang on a second. They're telling me maybe I'm in the wrong section. Do I want to be in the agricultural section? When I
well, we
talk
have,
about-
we
page
have,
7.
yeah, we have two concepts here. One is the seasonal sales, which is a land use, item. But then we also have then the directional off-site signage, concept. So the seasonal sales could be things, definitely beyond, things agricultural, in nature. And this could be the flower stands and things like that pop up at gas stations and things of that nature during certain times of the year.
Okay, well, I was just, in the overall gist of this conversation, I'm trying to make sure that if someone does have, 10 acres of strawberries, we have a way to promote him to sell his 10 acres of strawberries.
Well, and that's, you're right, and that's,
Down the road.
and that's why, we are trying to include this agricultural directional off-site sign concept to try to accommodate those active agricultural operations we have in town that do offer sales to the general public.
But see, David, and the reason I thought that wasn't where it should be is it says that they can only be up for 30 days on the very first line.
Four times a year, 30 days, right?
Well, yeah, but
Did
I
I read
mean,
that right, 120 days?
I mean, I'm trying to figure out how long strawberries grow, and I don't know that I know that answer. Mine don't grow very long at all. And, the vegetable stand that's out there in Southport, I mean, he doesn't have anything today, I wouldn't think, but he should be getting ready to open his stand and maybe stay open for 3 months, 4 months. I mean, 30 days, we have vegetables hopefully longer than 30 days. And that's where I didn't quite understand where the strawberry and vegetable stand that I know we have in our town come into play here.
Well, for those that they have a stand where they're actually growing, those things.
Right.
I mean, those are agricultural stand, they can do that. Does not have a time limit. The 30-day reference in here is the display of any off-site directional signage, and maybe the 30 days is too short, if that's maybe what I'm hearing.
Well, I'm questioning whether it is. I guess that's my two-bit comment, and I'm done. You just need to take a second look at that number, maybe.
Just a quick question, is it 30 consecutive days?
Where, are we on page 7? I want to make sure we're on page 7.
No, I'm back now.
Yeah, we're jumping around from 5 to 7, I think.
Yeah, they moved me back to page 5.
Yeah, so we're talking about the off-site signage for agricultural-related activities right now, I believe.
Is that where we are?
That's
But
page
we-
5.
Yeah, we're so
We
page 5
started
is
out on
that
page
one.
7, though.
Okay.
And then Charlie switched us.
Charlie, okay,
Actually,
got it.
other people told me I was on the wrong page, so. I could take this, but I mean,
sound really
if I'm on
similar,
page,
don't they?
I don't care what page we're on, I'm just concerned about our little stands that we had for the strawberry guy, the little vegetable stand out there, way out, that he have a way to direct people to their stands so they have an opportunity to purchase their product when it's available.
Yeah, and that is exactly what we're attempting to accomplish here.
And I'm
with
just not
stuff.
sure 30 days is the right number.
Oh, yeah, okay. We're on the
Because
right-
it
I'm on the right
seems
page.
like a vegetable stand is open 3 or 4 months in the year. I mean, you say they can do it 3 or 4 times in the year, the vegetable stand isn't gonna be open in December, but it'll be open maybe now.
Yeah, that's, basically, our hope tonight on this at a minimum was to make sure the planning commission was comfortable with the notion of having some off-site directional signage pertaining to agricultural, businesses in town, and then we can go forward with then the more the specifics of how that would be done. But we certainly appreciate any input on that side of this as well this evening.
Okay, so, I'm gonna go back to the temporary seasonal sales, or unless you wanna comment on the, okay. We're talking about like the little Valentine's Day stuff or Mother's Day that pop up and,
That is correct.
people pull over on the side of the road to
Right.
get to them.
That's
Exactly.
exactly what we're talking about.
Okay, I'm okay with the way it's written up. On the temporary seasonal sales on page 7, and that doesn't have to do with the agricultural.
So I'm okay with both. I apologize for my failure of leadership in distinguishing between the two temporary issues on the agenda, Charlie. But I'll move it on. I'm good with both.
I'm fine with both too, and I think we've uncovered an issue that may be about the seasonality or the length of a season to sell agricultural items, so as long as we think more about that, I'm fine.
I think signs have been beat to death, so I'll leave that one alone. On temporary seasonal sales, so page 7, my concern is with one part of the language that says may be permitted in any commercial zone. Temporary seasonal sales, such as Christmas trees. I want to make sure that we're not leaving out agricultural areas such as Dave's Pumpkin Patch. So are we prohibiting something like Dave's Pumpkin Patch?
Well, in agricultural zones, agricultural production and on-site sales of that is already permitted. So what we are trying to get at is the Mother's Day flowers at the gas station, the cherry stands that, come up in the summer that tend to go into more of our major arterials on commercial property.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear that these sales are permitted in ag land and covered in another section.
Yeah,
Okay.
agricultural production is already okay and as agricultural zones.
Okay, that was it for me.
No problem with the language on page 7. I just had a question on number 9. What if they're doing it on city property? Part 9 of that.
We can add that as a clarification that it cannot be done if you want to.
There is something already in the business license section of municipal code about conducting business on public property, and I don't recall offhand if that is a prohibition or not.
The reason I say that is because I've seen this kind of activity in the bike lane on Jefferson Boulevard, there between Southport and.
Yeah, and that's part of what has prompted this is that there have been a few operations over the last couple of years that have presented some problems where, particularly for the PD. And so we're trying to get a little more handle, because this is another topic that's, almost complete, the ordinance is almost completely silent on. But so we want to be able to accommodate, these type of operations under, just to on a certain level, but not currently have it be completely, unregulated either.
Well, and what bothered me with number 9 is the property owner. I mean, if they're, actually squatting and setting up their stand, then I don't think it should be necessarily the property owner in the case where it's the city, too. Gary?
So we hit both temporary pieces, right? Everybody comfortable?
Yes.
Okay, direction. So breweries.
Yeah.
Breweries.
Sorry.
I'll start with Jeremy.
Go to the expert.
Page 1.
Essentially, this is more room to taste, correct?
Yeah, currently in industrial areas, you can do up to 20% of your floor area for retail sale of your products manufactured on site. And so this case, based on the input we've been receiving and the at least 2 nanobreweries that are currently in building permit plan check right now, one of which that does desire to have a tasting room, and I imagine the other one probably will eventually, want to be able to try to accommodate that within some reason. These are tending to go into industrial zones. These are small operations of 3,000 square feet or less, what we've been experiencing. And consistent with what we've found in some other communities, including even what Sacramento has done recently, seeing that the 30% threshold seems to be the most common applied threshold in this manner for this topic.
Yeah, if that's in line with what we've seen, then yeah, I have no problem with that. Sounds good.
My only question, actually, you hit part of it, but what zones does this affect?
Well,
Is it wanting
breweries are principally right now, as a principal use, are principally only allowed in our industrial zones.
But this is a nano brewery, so it falls under the same only allowed in industrial. I'd be open to expanding that. I'm not sure where you'd want to put it, but that would include potentially commercial, to pull some of these nano breweries into. I'm not sure what type of other areas you think would be appropriate, but something with maybe a little bit more foot traffic, if you're going to add tasting.
Yeah, we certainly
Make it like, I don't want to say an attractive area, but, restaurants.
A brew pub now is already allowed in many commercial zones, and that's essentially a brewery with, a food, restaurant
Right.
attached to it as well. We made some changes along breweries, with the commission, last year, and we thought we got to where we needed to be, but then this other concept has taken it a little bit even further, and so we're trying to accommodate the term, nano breweries, which we do anticipate at least starting off in many industrial zones, because these are very small businesses, and they're certainly looking for space that is, perhaps more affordable than they'll find in a retail area, but we would certainly also hope that they would be able to graduate, to a more commercial retail area, should their businesses prove to be successful. So Sandra has the zoning ordinance open related to that.
So they're conditionally permitted in the business park zone, and as David had mentioned, they're permitted in all of the industrial zones, M1, M2, and M3. So,
And this was for breweries, and when we wrote that at the time, that was under the, under the guise of that these were, production facilities, first. I think it was first started, came up when Rubicon proposed to come to town, who wanted a purely production facility and wanted to be an industrial zone because they wanted to, and it's literally a production facility. Since that time, this nano brewery concept has, has come up, and it seems to be only growing in popularity and interest. We have at least 3 or 4 of them that are floating around town looking for space, and 2 that already have found homes. So I think that probably when this rolls around again next year, we may look at expanding this concept into, more retail areas and commercial areas as they, perhaps evolve from more of a wholesale production into more of a, retail establishment.
That would be my comment, and it's just because the response from our last change to the zoning has been so positive.
I'm fine with this suggestion.
I'm good. The only comment I would say is I've been out of it for a while, but I would just vet it through ABC. If there's a certain percentage of that business square footage, it has to be production. I'm not quite sure what the rules are. Maybe I'll check that.
I'm fine with it.
I'm fine also.
I just have a couple of comments I'd like to add. So given that there's going to be foot traffic and folks going in there, if there's anything on health and safety codes, given that it'll be public access to beverages, I don't know if there's anything else that we need to cover for this, and defer to you just to take a look at that and just provide some feedback. I've looked at wineries, and there's nice outdoor appearances. If they want to, looking at the streets of London, for example, they have a nice patio area. I don't know if we want to also take a look at landscaping use and things like that. If that's been explored or considered, or even any questions have come up on that.
Yeah, landscape is generally applied on, on the site basis, really based on the zone. It hasn't been traditionally applied based on the type of use, of the site. The ones we've been experiencing thus far have been seen to be going into some multi-tenant, industrial buildings, where everything is really existing, and then they're just doing tenant improvements, within the facility to accommodate the production and any other ancillary facilities. So if we were to start looking at landscaping on a use basis, that may be something we need to look at, perhaps a little bit broader than purely related to this operation.
And just in the future, if there's any additional comparables, for other cities or venues that have tasting rooms, just to get some idea of what works and doesn't work for background purpose. Thank you.
So I think next we have, is it land use matrix? Is that what you have? Density bonus.
This one was real quick. We actually brought this up because of something that came up in the real world on this, and so a little cleanup.
No, I don't have any comments.
No comments.
No comment.
Okay. Density bonus? Start with Martha.
Well, it looks like we're mandated to do this, so we are very limited in making any changes, from my understanding, correct? So we're just conforming to state law?
Yes,
Yes.
we've been out of compliance for a number of years, so we're, through our housing element, this update this year, which your commission saw previously this year, we have committed to finally updating our density bonus ordinance to be compliant with state law. And,
I understand that developers, from listening to presentations in the past, that they have been seeking to find ways to modify it, given the cost of building homes has and being able to sell the home, that they were interested in modifying this. Have you heard anything about that?
we have seen where, they have, as part of getting a density bonus, it's what waiver reduction or other incentives do you get, and we haven't had too many projects go through a density bonus over the years. So I can think of, 2 or 3 offhand. Usually, they maybe look for some setback changes or maybe a little bit of something on parking, things like that. But generally speaking, for what we have experienced here over the years, when many projects have been providing the affordable units that are in here, but they still haven't been close to some of the maximum densities that we otherwise allow. So we haven't had a lot of practical experience here and how this works in the real world in West Sacramento. But we have applied it a couple of times over the years, and I don't recall the specific projects as to what incentives were granted then, but we certainly have tried to maintain consistency with state law, even if our own ordinance had not been updated over the years. So our only thing in this, is about what level of waiver or reduction of development standards would we grant for a project. And certainly developers would probably could look for fairly significant reductions, and we may or may not grant everything, but we certainly have to follow this, and there's some provisions in there about what we can and cannot do in that regard. This was definitely written to make sure that local governments do grant these incentives when a project is eligible.
Thank you. Charlie? Jennifer?
No comment.
I think our last item is reasonable accommodation. I'll start with Jeremy.
Everything, I don't have any notes written for that either. So.
Charlie? No. All right, David, I think you have all of our input on that. Look forward to...
No, we're not talking about those. We don't want to.
did I miss detached accessories?
Yeah, there are a few more minor items. We certainly don't.
What did I miss here?
It's up to the commission. We weren't necessarily looking for. We're certainly looking for input on anything the commission has tonight. We did not broach that particular topic. It seems perhaps more of a minor one.
So why don't we do this? We'll just do a catch up on the remaining issues, and if you have comments, we'll make them. I'll start with my right.
Sorry, what are we doing again?
The remaining issues.
The remaining issues.
Detached structures. Maybe it. Signs we covered.
The ones that we haven't covered yet, I guess.
Yes.
Okay.
Anything we haven't covered that you have notes on.
I am interested in the concept of the interior and then the rear, building a detached structure in the rear versus the side. I think I just needed to get a little more background so I can get a more visual of what that would look like and what you're trying to accomplish.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And we can provide that. This also came up with a railroad code enforcement matter, so code enforcement finds a lot of things for us to try to address.
Charlie?
I don't have anything else.
No concerns there.
I think we've given you everything on that topic, and we'll hear back from you.
Yes, I believe we did manage to cover everything tonight. We appreciate the commission taking the time on this tonight. Recognize it was a lot of material of fairly, somewhat disparate topics. But with tonight's input, we would hope to be able to refine some of these things and then return to you in a July meeting in a hearing fashion with the hopes of moving at least the majority of this on to City Council.
Great. Next time, we'd appreciate a discussion matrix up here that we can follow clearly, with maybe points to consider. All right, any informal discussion at this time?
I'm sorry.
No.
I still have a couple of neighbors on the Webster property. It's that property that kind of goes to a V, and remember we granted him to build a fence so he could put his boat back in there?
The boat one, yeah.
That boat has still never moved, and I asked about it a couple months ago, and it still isn't doing anything. And I don't understand what our purpose of allowing him to do that with the fence if he doesn't move the boat. And that's the same comment a neighbor gave me, too. So could you kind of look into that?
Yes, yeah, we can.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, I look for a motion.
I think that Mr. Tilley had something to
Just
tell us.
Yes, real quick, we will be canceling our next regularly scheduled meeting, which will be June 20th, and then our following meeting after that would have otherwise been on July 4th. So we will not meet then either. So our next meeting will be July 18th here. We will have at least 2 or 3 items of substance for the Commission's consideration that night. And so since we will not see you before July 4th, I hope everyone has a great July 4th.
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Those in favor?
Aye.
It's adjourned.